first time that you're joining us, welcome to Talking Radio. Today is podcast number 4, and the focus today is on how to make contact with air traffic control. So today we're still focusing on operations or flying within controlled airspace. We're going to keep it very simple. We're starting on the ground. So you've done your quick flight checks, climbed into aircraft, or maybe you're going to be flying a drone, you're preparing to get the drone started up, whatever it is that you're going to be flying. In this instance, it's controlled airspace and communication with ATC. So you're obviously hesitant and nervous when you initially get involved with communication, especially to air traffic control. That sounds very intimidating when you hear their voice, and you think that you'll never understand what they're saying and why are you saying everything that you're doing, and it becomes a bit of a fear factor for many people out there. Now remember, this also affects air traffic controllers when they first starting out. In other words, trainee air traffic controllers. We also have to go through the same process of communication, learning what to say, how to say it, when to say it, and what these different terminologies mean. Now, in order for you to communicate on frequency with air traffic control, you need to know a few procedures. One of them specifically is you need to know radio telephony. So when air traffic control asks you something or gives you an instruction, you know how to respond. Unlike speaking English in a normal one-on-one conversation, this is got it twisted because we've got to speak using a terminology that is not commonly known to us when we first start out in the aviation sector. And it would go the same for when we later on discuss the marine sector and RT. But today we're discussing aviation. So what we're going to do is give you a few pointers, a few things to think about before making contact with ATC and when in communication with ATC. So remembering with today's example, it's all while you're still on the ground. So you haven't gotten airborne yet, just want to make contact with ATC. So let's kick off with the radio itself. You've switched the radio on. Okay? That forms part of your pre-flight. No matter what you're going to be flying, at some point you're going to switch the radio on. Now you've got a few selection switches on the radio. We've talked about this previous podcast with your switching your master switch on or switching your main switch on, and checking when if there's any background noise, doing a radio check. And we've been through this process. But now we're actually going to use the radio. So we need to go a little bit further, and we need to look at a feature called the PTT. The PTT stands for push to talk, not push to think. Okay? So when you select the PTT, you need to plan to speak, following through with it. So in other words, before you get to PTT, first plan your message. Think about what you're going to say. The radio telephony communication that you're going to be using when speaking to ATC is pretty standard. So there are variations on some of the transmissions, and worldwide there will be a different way that the air traffic controller might say it to you as well when in communication. But that's just the procedure for that area, okay, for that what we would call flight information region. The process is going to be the same each time. In other words, when you're going to speak on the radio, you first need to make contact with the air traffic control. You can't just select the PTT and then start communicating. The air traffic controller, how do we know that they are waiting and ready to receive our transmission? They don't even know who you are on first contact. You need to announce yourself. We've been through that as well with regards to your registration. Now, as I said earlier, we're just focusing on you and how you're going to communicate. So, selecting the PTT is the reflex followed by your communication. When in doubt, take your finger off the PTT. So in other words, stop communication as soon as possible. And the reason for this is so that you can gather your thoughts, think about what were you going to say, and then communicate again on frequency. When you have the PTT selected and you are not sure what to say, and your transmission sounds something like, and then you already can hear there's so much hesitation on the frequency. The last thing you want to do is to also hold up other traffic that may want to use that same frequency at that time. But by you holding the PTT down, you are obstructing them from being able to communicate on frequency. And in so doing, you have become the master of your own airwave. In other words, you hold the channel to you, and no one else is able to speak. No one else is able to communicate. This is not a safe situation to have during this time. So deselect the PTT, breathe, think, communicate. Obviously selecting the PTT before you communicate. Now, with the PTT itself, there are a few features which you need to also take note of when selecting and deselecting. When you select the PTT, first select it, make sure you've depressed it down completely, and then start communication. When you've finished the transmission, then deselect the PTT in that order. Often it is found, and as air traffic controllers, we find that the pilot, due to being hesitant and unsure, nervous, doubt as to what to say, they will come onto frequency while they've already started speaking. So we call that clipping the transmission. All of a sudden we just hear a voice talking as the controller, and then as quick as we heard it, that's as quick as it disappears. But the end of the message hasn't successfully come through. So we don't know who was calling. We don't know the call sign or the registration of that aircraft that was making the transmission. Unless, of course, as an ATC, and it's in local knowledge, we know the voice or we know the registration. We have an idea who that could have been. But that's not how air traffic control is managed. Air traffic control can't assume. We have to control positively. And in order to do that, we need the input and the support from the pilots, just as much as the pilot is relying on the ATC. So, plan your message, select the PTT, talk, finish the transmission, deselect the PTT. That's the process that you're going to follow. Now, once you've established communication with ATC using your 5-digit registration, they will, and remember, the registration might not necessarily be a 5-digit, just to add to that, as we go on later and as you do your, move on to your commercial pilot's license, we'll start talking about non-scheduled flights and scheduled flights, and there is a variation to this. So for now, just focus on your registration. Keep it much simpler. You're just starting out to communicate, what is my registration? And I have become my registration when I sit in the aircraft. Think of it like that. So you're becoming part of the aircraft up until the point you climb out the aircraft and once it's shut down, your name is now the registration of the aircraft. So that's a way to go through things. Now, when we talk about the registration, that's normally mounted in some form on the front of the column stick in front of you. And this I'm assuming you're in a fixed wing aircraft or in a rotary wing aircraft, such as in other words a helicopter. But there is some kind of indication as to what your registration is. Again, if you're flying a drone, you're not going to have this in front of you, but the registration of the drone is sealed onto the drone itself. The person flying a paraglider won't have the registration on the wing of the paraglider, but They look down at the column in front of them. It will be mounted near the radio. And that is what your focus is when you're going to establish contact. So you are becoming one with that call sign. Sorry, let me rephrase. Becoming one with the registration of that aircraft. Then you establish contact. When you establish contact, remember it's just like you are going to arrive at somebody's house. So you knock on the door and you wait for that person to open the door. When they open the door, you formally greet and then you invite them into the house. You don't just, hi, how are we doing today? That doesn't really bode as a formal introduction. That's quite rude. And how much guarantee have you got that the other party will even know who's speaking at that point? So what's going to happen is, if you just start your transmission and hope for the best that the party on the other side, in other words, the air traffic controller, is hearing you, there's a good chance that they're not hearing you because they're busy with something else. And when you are finished your transmission, you're going to hear the following. Last call on 121.9. Say again. And then you, as the pilot, are going to have to repeat that transmission all over. This is wasting time on frequency. And time is very valuable when it comes to flight inside of controlled airspace. So you've got to really think about your actions. At the same time, though, you must not fear what you're going to say. So you need to plan this. You need to sit with somebody if you're really struggling with RT and work it through with them. Even if that person doesn't understand radio telephony, you need to practice. This is not something that's going to come naturally to everybody. So you need to be aware of it. Don't hide from it. Don't let your instructor or someone else do the radio work for you while you focus on the flying. You need to do this while in flight. Okay, so you need to be able to multitask. You need to be able to fly and speak at the same time. And that's where you're going to need to practice. You're going to need to understand what these terminologies mean. When in doubt, you're going through your back pocket. In this instance, you're going to be able to say to the air traffic controller, say again. Tower, say again. Or ground, say again. That person will then repeat the message for you to ensure that you understand what they're saying. Sometimes it is of something that you can say, although it's not really published. You won't find this in many documents that you go through when it comes to standard radio telephony, including ICAO, where it says that you can say student pilot. But this is accepted. The term student pilot is notifying the air traffic controller in a roundabout way that you are not fully conversant with radio telephony communications at this stage, and you'd like them to assist you. So you would say something like, student pilot Alpha 2, Alpha Romeo 1. Okay, so there the term student pilot was brought in the front of the registration, and it's notifying the air traffic controller that you might have some problems with speaking on frequency, and you might be asking them to repeat their transmission at regular or irregular intervals, whatever the case may be. Now with this communication, something else for you to think about, and only if this is possible, and remember we're speaking about controlled airspace in this podcast today, is making a visit to the control tower where you're flying from, or the one nearest you, and go and visit the air traffic controller. Obviously, if this is permitted, there may be security checks. With COVID-19, they might not necessarily be able to allow additional visitors into the control tower, etc. But if this is possible, go and visit the control tower and go and meet the person on the other side of the frequency. Find out what they can see from the control tower.